We'll give it a minute for folks to get logged on. Good morning, everyone. We'll give it just a moment for folks to get logged on. All right, let's get right down to it. Good morning, everybody. On behalf of the 495 MetroWest Partnership, I want to thank you for joining us for this morning's presentation from our friends at the MWRA. My name is Jason Palich. I have the honor of serving as Executive Director of the partnership. Before I introduce our presenters this morning, I'm going to go over some housekeeping items briefly. All attendees are muted during today's session. Following the presentation, we will invite you to ask questions of our panelists by typing them into the chat function of the Zoom meeting today. I will moderate the Q&A portion by selecting questions from the chat. Please note, of course, that any questions which are redundant, overly long, or disrespectful will not be asked. At a pre-pandemic meeting, we'd begin with our participants and attendees going around the room to introduce themselves. And keeping with that spirit, this time we invite you to utilize the chat function to introduce yourself with your name, title, and organization so folks can get a sense of who's all with us here this morning. And just to note that today's session is being recorded and will be shared online later via the partnership's website and possibly social media as well. Should you experience any technical problems during the session this morning, our immediate guidance is to log out and then log back in. Should you need further assistance, the partnership's manager of policy and planning, Jeremy Thompson, is available to assist you and can be reached via email at jeremy@495partnership.org. And with that, on to today's presentation. We're very pleased this morning to be joined by folks representing the Massachusetts Water Resources Authority, or MWRA, and the MWRA Advisory Board. MWRA is a public authority established by the legislature in 1984 to provide wholesale water and sewer services in 61 metropolitan Boston communities, including at present 6 communities in the 495 MetroWest Partnership's service area. The MWRA Advisory Board is an independent agency that was established at the same time to represent the interests of cities and towns in the MWRA's service area. Today's presentation will focus on MWRA's activities and services in the region and will be followed by a Q&A for those who wish to ask questions of our presenters. Our presenters this morning include Joseph Favaloro, who is the Executive Director of the MWRA Advisory Board, Bethany Card, Director of Environmental and Regulatory Affairs at the MWRA, Matthew Romero, Deputy Executive Director for the MWRA Advisory Board, James Gio, Director of Finance for the MWRA Advisory Board, and Katie Ronan, who is an Environmental Analyst with MWRA. So on behalf of the 495 MetroWest Partnership, I want to thank our presenters for being here. And at this point, I'll turn things over to Joe.
First and foremost, Jason, thank you for allowing us to come before you and before the Water Resources Commission and putting this on your agenda. Which now seems like forever. I had the pleasure many years ago to come before your committee to talk about the infrastructure investment and its impacts, its beneficial impacts on the economy. But today we just wanted to reach out and to reacquaint you with who the MWRA is, and and really kind of emphasis is really on sincerely hope that we can all find a way maybe to work together to develop regional solutions to really what is regional problems. And one area that really sticks out is on this water side and the distributions of water. Many communities in your service area and throughout the Commonwealth of Massachusetts are facing water quality challenges with elevated PFAS levels. Some are facing issues with the uncertainty of meeting future water needs. Frankly, some are facing the uncertainty of meeting summer demands with water bans, and especially as we are in, unfortunately, starting another drought in the Commonwealth. Some communities may just need an insurance policy. What if we need water? Where would we get it? And today's message is the MWRA is an area that we can help you, we can work with you. The one thing we have is plenty of water. The one thing that is somewhat of a problem is it's not the water, it's how to get the water to you. And with all the talk of stimulus funds, with tomorrow's supposed announcement of a $3 trillion infrastructure bill, maybe all of us working together can find a way to get ourselves to the front of that line so that we can create a regional solution for local water problems, which is clearly good for your area and frankly for my ratepayers and the other communities of the MWRA. And with that little short intro, I just kick it to Beth to kind of give you a little preview on who we are and some of the activities on the water side. Beth?
Great. Thanks so much for that opening, Joe, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with the 495 MetroWest Partnership again this morning. So thanks everyone for joining. I think we're going to put up some slides here for everyone to follow along as we speak, but I want to just give a little bit of an overview of who the MWRA is for those who are not familiar, what our water system is like, and a little bit about what joining the authority entails and what some of the benefits of that membership include. So we can go ahead right to the next slide, please. The Massachusetts Water Resources Authority is a public water supply system. We are a wholesale supplier of water and wastewater services to over 3.1 million people across the Commonwealth. We serve we serve 61 communities. Some of those are water and sewer communities. Some of those are just water, some are just sewer. And our water comes quite a ways east from the protected Quabbin and Wachusett reservoirs, 65 miles and 35 miles respectively across the Commonwealth to us here in the greater Boston area and beyond. Our water supply is treated at the Carroll Water Treatment Plant in Marlborough, and on average, we are supplying 200 million gallons per day, and we'll talk a little bit about water quantity and water volumes in the slides ahead. As many folks know, on the wastewater side, our wastewater is treated at the Deer Island Wastewater Treatment Plant located in Boston. Those are the big egg digesters you can see when we used to fly out of Logan, and we'll hopefully be back flying again. But you can see the facility there. It is you know, among the largest in the country, and our entire system, both water and wastewater, really are world-class in terms of sophistication of treatment and management. So just a visual of the water. We're focusing on water supply, obviously, here this morning. So you can see the path that our water takes as it leaves the Quabbin and makes its way east. We do generate some power along the way. We're fortunate to have some hydro facilities that we utilize as the water makes its way. And I should mention that our efforts are not just what the MWRA and MWRA Advisory Board, but we also in partnership with our colleagues at the Department of Conservation and Recreation in terms of management of the watershed and protection of the watershed. Next slide, please. This is what the Quabbin looks like on a beautiful fall day. I can tell there from the leaves changing, but it really is pristine. And I think you know, one of the most important things about our system is the way the land is managed within the watershed. We have been able to avoid what would otherwise be very costly filtration requirements under the Federal Safe Drinking Water Act as a result of the fact that we and our partners own and manage all of the land that surrounds this watershed, which protects it and keeps it safe. Next slide, please. So probably, you know, of interest to many folks who are considering where your water comes from, depending on where you are in the 495 metro area, this is a general map of our service area. You can see, as I had mentioned earlier, that some of our communities are water only or sewer only, or a combination. On the water side, some communities are partially supplied by the MWRA and some are fully supplied. And as you can, and we also serve a little bit further west, a small number of communities in the Chicopee Valley aqueduct system, which is the part of the insert that you see there. So just wanted to give a flavor of where we are. I think, you know, and we'll talk about this as we go forward later on in the slides, but geographically, we may be quite close to some of the communities in the 495 MetroWest area. And we can talk a little bit about, as Joe said, as we're looking at partnerships and looking at ways to maybe form additional relationships, what some of the infrastructure connections and needs might be in terms of delivering water beyond our current service area. That's something that I think MWRA has quite a few conversations with interested communities on a regular basis about how we might go about doing that. And we'll come back to that as we go ahead. One of the things that Joe had mentioned that I think is one of the most important parts about our system is the availability to supply and support additional demand and need. The MWRA system has many years worth of storage within our reservoir. This is incredibly unique for a water supply system. And water use and management and conservation has really evolved and progressed in the last several decades. You can see from the table here that we have gone from volumes in the 80s of well over 300 million gallons per day down to where we are more recently in the 195 to 200 million gallons per day on average. And that is happening despite the fact that we have continued to grow and supply additional communities and additional needs as we've gone forward. And that is really a great credit to our member communities, to the conservation measures that they've put into place, and to the authority itself in terms of how we've worked to manage that supply. Our safe yield of the system, which is the max that we would be allowed to use on average, is 300 million gallons a day. So you obviously can see that we have about 100 million gallons per day, not to spare, but to carefully allocate as would be needed to support economic growth and development across the Commonwealth, and to help support communities that may be having need, whether it be related to water quantity, water quality issues, or, as Joe said, just want to have that safety net for the just in case. I would be remiss if I didn't also mention that the water tastes good. People really like MWRA water. This is a news report that was in Bloomberg maybe 2 weeks ago now, talking about the high prices of bottled water around the world. And in the same article was mention of you know, here in Oslo, Norway, right, bottled water is super expensive. And then yet here in Boston, our tap water tastes good. That's important. And it's important from the perspective of course, we want good tasting and aesthetically pleasing water, but we also want our consumers to have confidence in their water. And if the water doesn't taste good, or if it doesn't look right, people look for other options, and they might look for bottled water or other sources. We want our public, our members, and I think, you know, generally we want the public water supply industry to be met with confidence by consumers. And I think this is just an example of one of the ways we hope we instill confidence in our water supply system. So let's get to what it means and how folks go about joining the MWRA. And I'll apologize, this part of the presentation is necessary for folks to understand in terms of what admission to the authority looks like. It does feel a little bureaucratic when we talk about it, but the steps are important, and the steps are important because I think it's critical to make sure everyone understands what membership to the authority entails, but it also, because we are so careful about how admission happens, is how we've continued to maintain the ample supply that we have and to adequately protect our water system. So there are two ways that a community could join the authority: either a direct connection directly to MWRA infrastructure and part of the MWRA system, or an indirect connection through another community. You may have a community that is a member and then a neighboring community, and there may be ways to flow water or wheel water through an already or an existing MWRA customer. I would say one important thing for any community that is contemplating MWRA membership or what that might look like, to reach out to us. Every situation is unique. The infrastructure is different everywhere. The circumstances are different everywhere. Capacity is different everywhere. And so having one-on-one conversations with communities is something that we do on a regular basis at the authority. And sometimes it's just folks just with a simple question and they just want to know in case for future, or sometimes it's because they're in earnest trying to pursue admission. And so I would note that if that is something that folks are interested in, you could certainly reach out to me directly, or Katie Ronan, who's a panelist here, an environmental analyst at the authority, handles a lot of these inquiries, and we partner with the advisory board, of course, in these conversations. So operating policy 10, OP 10, which is the document that outlines admission to the authority, can be made available to anyone who wants to see it. I'm going to give you some of the highlights of that here today, but ultimately folks need to understand that admission to the authority, while there are many steps that lead up to this, end with approval by the MWRA Advisory Board and the MWRA Board of Directors. There we go. The slides are a little slow to change on my end, so I apologize for that. So I guess, when thinking about some of the details of, we'll get to the admission requirements that the OP10 overview will come in a minute. I think, I've talked about some of the benefits of joining the authority under OP10, and when we say that, we mean full admission, full membership to the authority. Again, as we've been saying, abundant water supply, excellent water quality, large protected watersheds. These are all the things that we take very seriously here at the authority. But it's not only the availability of the water and the kind of water, it's the technical support and guidance that we can provide to communities going forward. I know many communities, and I saw Jen Peterson from Mass Waterworks Association is a panel attendee this morning, and so she can attest. Public water suppliers are faced with a lot of responsibility, whether it's monitoring and reporting to DEP and EPA, it's laboratory needs, whether it's looking at lead and copper requirements, it's publishing consumer confidence reports. As we are looking ahead, Joe had mentioned new concerns, new pollutants of concern, PFAS, all of this. And so there's a lot that goes into managing a water system. And while some public water suppliers are very sophisticated and have all of the resources that they need to do this effectively, others struggle. These are big jobs, they're costly requirements, and there's a lot that goes into it. And some towns or cities may find themselves challenged by staying on top of all of this through no fault of their own, other than it's a really big job with a lot of responsibilities. So I think with the authority comes lots of support for that type of technical assistance, sampling, reporting, et cetera. Comes with eligibility for some MWRA loan programs related to local water systems and their needs, lead service line replacement as an example. As I mentioned, technical support, training opportunities, on-site emergency assistance. I have a lot of respect for our waterworks operations team, who are the folks that you might see on the side of the road at a water main break in the middle of the night, or trailering a generator to a community that is having an issue at one of their plants. To fixing a valve that's sprung a leak, whether it's ours or one of our member communities. I think having that support from these folks is really incredible. The water conservation and demand management program, as I said, we have lots of water. We are not, and we take management of that water very seriously. We're not here to waste water, but there's plenty of it, and I think that's important. And then, as was mentioned, management and compliance with new DEP and EPA requirements is something that we can certainly help with. So then we can talk a little bit now about what the admission requirements are. The water supply, planning involves really a couple of things. First, there's obviously got to be local support and local interest from whether it's town manager or board of select people to make the decision to pursue. And to look at what water demands MWRA could help supply for the community. So looking at the local sources, what's available, what the challenges are, and where we might be able to bring water through our system. On the regulatory side, there are a number of steps, and it's important to know. So the Enabling Act of the authority is legislatively amended to add a new community. So that obviously comes with legislative and governor approval. That step can happen at any point in the process. It just needs to happen before admission is complete. And I'll be honest that once folks have made the decision to join the authority and have gone through all of the local approvals, as well as some of the state approvals that I will talk about, the legislative piece is the easiest part often of the whole thing. MEPA, so the Massachusetts Environmental Policy Act review. So a transfer of water of this nature to a new community is subject to full MEPA review. And that effort, and I'll talk a little bit about this, goes hand in hand with the Interbasin Transfer Act requirements of the Commonwealth's Water Resources Commission. So the interbasin transfer part can be a little bit confusing. I think it's important to understand that even if water is moving from town A to town B, it's MWRA water, and it's just going right to a neighboring community, it is still considered to be an interbasin transfer, because the water isn't really going from town A to town B, it's coming from the Quabbin all the way to town B. So the Interbasin Transfer Act process is followed, and so folks would work with Water Resources Commission staff based out of DCR, Department of Conservation and Recreation, for that effort. The MEPA process and the interbasin transfer process almost go in tandem. The MEPA process feeds the interbasin transfer process, and then the Water Resources Commission does hold public hearings for comment on the transfer of water and the admission of the MWRA. And really what's being looked at here are a couple of key things. Is there enough water in the donor basin? So that's where the authority comes in, and certainly we help with that analysis and how that all comes together. What is happening with the local sources? Why can't the local sources be used? What conservation measures might a community have in place? those kinds of things. So that analysis does take some time. I mean, I think we'll get to that maybe a little bit in the next slide. And then there is also Mass DEP approval as well on the state regulatory side. And maybe let's go to the next slide. We'll hit the rest of them. So the approval process, as I have been saying, so the MEPA interbasin transfer, the legislative process, and then ultimately through the advisory board and the MWRA board of directors for approval. And OP10 really does lay out all of those steps, and it is a very collaborative process between the MWRA, the advisory board, and the community that's interested in pursuing admission. The cost of connection, these are questions that obviously communities will have as they're considering entrance. So, I think first and foremost, the community is responsible for costs associated with connection. So that infrastructure, right? Whether it's a direct connection to the authority or an indirect connection through another community. There is an entrance fee, and the entrance fee is really meant to keep all of the communities that are already members and then future members equally sharing the value and the cost of maintaining the system. So there's a formula for calculating the entrance fee, and it is spelled out in OP10. It's based on the net asset value of the water system and what the new community shares will look like. And that really is dictated by the volumes that a new community is seeking to avail themselves of from the authority. So the current entrance fee based on for one MGD customer is about $4.4 million. And so you can do the math if seeking more or less than that one MGD. That cost has been fairly steady for the last couple of years. And, I think we anticipate that being around that number for the time being. I think one of the really helpful things for some communities is the fact that this entrance fee can be paid over a 25-year period, interest-free with the first 3 years, with a grace period for the first 3 years. And so that's something that even very recently, new communities that have decided to join the authority have availed themselves of. So separate from the entrance fee is the annual water assessment. So this is the rate per million gallons. Right now, as you can see, that's about $4,300, which would be an annual assessment, again, at 1 MGD, approximately $1.6 million. And again, this rate has slightly has slight increases through the years, not dramatic increases that we are anticipating. Okay, so as we've talked about in terms of the application and approval, one thing I think it's important to, when we talk about the application, and folks will say, I want to prepare an application, there is no form for applying to admission to the MWRA. The application is the compilation of all of the documents that a community prepares through MEPA, through interbasin transfer, the legislative approvals, the local approvals. And I will say, between the advisory board as well as the MWRA staff, we work very closely with a community that's going through this process. We've done it a handful of times. We have good relationships with our colleagues at DEP and the Water Resources Commission and MEPA so that we can help with our expertise as we go through that. Obviously, we can't do everything for the community, but we try to assist communities as much as we can. It can be a lengthy process. I think, we ballpark this at about a 2-year process from beginning to end in terms of getting the regulatory and local approvals that are needed. And in the end, once approval is reached, there is a water supply agreement between MWRA and the member community that spells out the terms of the relationship. And sometimes that varies depending on whether the water is being wheeled through another community or it's a direct connection, and we establish the volumes and the rates associated with that. Next slide, please. So I will just spend very brief amount of time. I don't want to be the one doing all of the talking here about emergency connections. So MWRA does have an operating policy, OP5, that talks about emergency connections. And this is more of a much more streamlined process that allows a community that in an emergency scenario that needs water to either utilize a short-term connection up to 30 days or a longer-term emergency connection up to 6 months. The way an emergency often happens is, in my experience, one of two things. A community that has an existing interconnection with another town or the authority that isn't regularly utilized, right, or is there as a redundant measure, or could quickly install some sort of emergency connection, whether it's hydrant to hydrant, which isn't often, but or an actual physical connection, has an emergency. Often the emergency is in the summer, in a drought, water availability for a town, right? So Mass DEP issues an emergency declaration for that town. That emergency declaration comes in the form of an administrative consent order that allows the community to basically skip the interbasin transfer and the MEPA requirements associated with that transfer of water for a period of time, subject to conditions. An emergency connection that is 30 days or less can happen under the approval of MWRA's Chief Operating Officer or Executive Director for communities that have needed an emergency in such a situation. These are things we turn around in a matter of days. A longer-term connection may be something that communities are thinking about right now. We know that there are communities that are struggling with PFAS issues, for example. So they are trying to figure out a little bit of a longer-term solution and may have a little bit of time to plan for that, not much. And longer-term emergency connections, subject, again, following the DEP emergency declaration and subject to the board and advisory board and board of directors approval for up to 6 months. And then we put an emergency water supply agreement into place between MWRA and the community. I think one of the most important things to think about in terms of an emergency connection is that in order for a community to avail themselves of an emergency connection, it would be wise to sort of think about, obviously try to plan for the emergency. I'm preaching to the choir, but if we have never done the analysis of water quality compatibility, that is something that could hold up that process, right? We want to make sure that by blending two water sources, we don't inadvertently cause corrosivity issues in the system. So that's just one thing that I mentioned, but emergency connections are things that we deal with quite a bit, and we're happy to work with any community that has an issue, and we do that very closely with the community and with DEP. The entrance fee or the rates for an emergency connection are set forth in the policy, and they are our standard rate, but there is an escalating component of that. We don't want an emergency connection to be a standard, become a standard practice for an entity that needs water at certain times of year. So we really try to incentivize joining full membership rather than continuing to use the emergency connections year after year after year. Next slide. I think that might have been the last slide. So I guess, I'll offer if my colleagues have anything that they would want to add, but I think, the take-home message that I would offer to folks this morning is that We recognize there is a lot happening for public water suppliers right now. We are potentially a resource, whether it's partially on an emergency basis, or fully to assist in full supply. I would encourage folks to reach out to us directly for case by case examples and conversation about what might be possible. But we really are here to want to, hold ourselves out as a resource and at least be part of that conversation if it's potentially feasible to extend our service area to communities that might need it. And so I'll ask if either Joe or Matt or Sean have anything else that they want to add. And if not, Jason, I think we can take questions if you have any. Joe, did I miss anything?
You were right on top of it. Good job. Nope.
Thank you.
Excellent. Well, in that case, I think we'd be happy to take some questions at this time. We do have one that's already come in, and I actually have a slew myself. So first of all, thank you guys for a fantastic presentation. That was very informative, very insightful. I'm going to go first to some of the audience questions. So a specific one to start off with, but an interesting one nonetheless. Chapter 259 of the Acts of 2014. So legislation contained authorization for funding to subsidize connection to MWRA. Have the MWRA Advisory Board or MWRA had any recent conversations with the legislature or the administration about getting appropriations to support future connections?
Go ahead, Joe. Yep.
Please.
Oh, no, I was going to ask you to answer it anyway.
But we're always working closely with the legislature. Clearly, the MWRA Legislative Caucus has been an invaluable asset to us. Our two past chairman of the caucus was the Speaker DeLeo, and our current caucus chairman is Speaker Mariano. So that we were very active in getting the language that was placed in the economic development bill as as a part of us moving forward, and as a community gets into the discussion, then that elevates us to the level of taking it to that next level. Currently, we haven't had any formal, inquiries as it relates to that funding. But we would, be it the language that was in the 2014 bill, the stimulus language, the potential infrastructure bill, all of these would be would be available to us for a community or a series of communities to kind of work with us. That's why, in many ways, if it's something that's of interest to communities in this area, this is the ideal time to kind of kick the tires on it, because there are opportunities out there that, of all of us working together, we may be able to get you to work to get the water to you with some subsidies from the feds, from the state, in order to allow it to happen.
Great, thank you. And another question before I do, just quick logistically, if folks in the audience want to ask a question, you can put it either into the Q&A function or the chat function. We'll catch it either way. But is MWRA a registered water user under WMA, which I believe is Water Management Act? If so, how will proposed changes to registered users under the WMA impact MWRA?
I can take that one. That's a great question. You got all the acronyms correct, Jason, so well done. So MWRA is a registered user under the Commonwealth's Water Management Act. Our registered volumes, as established by the law, are the 300 million gallons per day that I spoke about in the beginning. So by that very nature, we are subject to, for folks who may not know, Mass DEP has announced that they are proposing a regulatory change under their Water Management Act rules that would allow them to condition registrations, registered volumes. There are registered volumes and permitted volumes. Permits always have conditions. Registered volumes have not generally had condition. It's been something that DEP has not pursued until now. So DEP's proposal would allow them to require compliance with the state's drought management plan, unless certain criteria are met. Right now, DEP's proposal allows for or deems a public water supplier compliant or exempt from the state drought management plan requirements if they have storage within their reservoir system of up to, I think it's up to 3 years worth of storage, and they have an approved, DEP approved drought management plan already. It does so happen that MWRA meets both of those criteria. We do have more than 3 years of storage. We do have a DEP approved drought management plan. So in theory, we would continue to, despite the new rules, we will continue to operate under under our own drought management plan as opposed to the state's drought management plan. I will say, of course, like many of our colleagues, other public water suppliers, we have concerns about sort of this shift in approach in terms of conditioning registrations. What I just described in terms of what DEP is proposed, and I certainly don't speak for them, and what the exemption looks like was a basic explanation. Of course, it's a lot more complicated than that. So that is a long-winded answer to the question about whether we are subject to it. So the short answer is yes, we are, but we think that we qualify for the exemption as it's currently proposed. And just to remind, DEP has not even yet put out draft rules for folks to consider. They're still in the concept phase, but from what we gather so far. So I think I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. We've got some more audience questions, but I do have one that I wanted to throw in, which is about physical infrastructure. So obviously, aging or older water infrastructure is not terribly uncommon throughout New England. And obviously every municipality in the Commonwealth in one way or another is supplying water to its residents. But I'm curious, as if there's a community that's interested in hooking up to MWRA, what are some of the infrastructure challenges you have to confront with physical infrastructure? Do you ever find that major improvements need to be made? How do those get financed? Is that part of the process of calculating what the municipality will owe when they join? Is it a pretty common situation in each new municipality that wants to hook up, or is it really different situations by community? Sorry for the loaded question.
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and I'll take a first crack at it, and I will look to my colleagues to maybe fill in where I miss. It's often that we will be interacting with the community and have to look at infrastructure. I think that some of the big challenges are what does the community know about its own system? What type of hydraulic modeling does it have? What sort of level of sophistication to know sort of what capacity is within their system to take in new water and where. The geographic location of pipes to pipes and valves is all often looks easier on a map than it is in reality, I think. And so I think certainly, getting from point A to point B to point C, there's the engineering and then the physical construction that has to go along with that. I think that can be, it can be costly. I think sometimes a community may have to do upgrades of its own system. Do we have I don't know, I'm not an engineer, so this was, do we have a 30-inch pipe going to a 24-inch pipe, and what do we have to do to remedy that? So the infrastructure part of it, there's a lot to that, but we are, I think our engineering and construction folks are very good at troubleshooting sort of how to remedy some of those issues. And I do think it is not one size fits all, but again, I can't, a week or two doesn't go by where we're not having that kind of conversation with either an existing member community or a community that's interested in sort of looking at that. So we can really pull out, not me, but like the engineers, right, can pull out the drawings and sort of look at what types of things go into that. The infrastructure is a big part of it. It's a good question, Jason. I think, but those, I think there are often solutions that we're able to work together from community to community. So I don't want to put anybody else on the spot, but did I miss anything from?
I'll give it a stab for the part B, if you like, Beth. I think that
Sure.
one of the things that Beth pointed out in her presentation was two items, I should say. And the first one was a local pipeline assistance program and a lead removal program. One of the things that both the authority and the advisory board are most proud of is that we have put a program together where nearly now $700 million has gone back to communities in interest-free loans to improve their local infrastructures. That the thousands of miles of water mains have been replaced, storage towers have been replaced. All of these to help the community's local systems work at their best. The second part of it, when lead first became a major issue, the MWRA was the first entity in the country that put together a program to provide interest-free loans for all of our water communities to actually remove lead services within their system. All of these, I think, are unique, one-of-a-kind programs which have been critical for communities to maximize their systems. EPA has recognized the programs as really a good example of a partnership between the authority and its communities. But I would mention it again, the pipeline assistance program, replacement program, and the lead service line replacement programs, both have hundreds of millions of dollars in it. And they're interest-free loans to our member communities to be paid back over a 10-year period.
A related question and similarly loaded, so my apologies. Again, at the top of the presentation, somebody had made mention of ARPA, the American Rescue Plan, obviously the federal stimulus. Now, as a municipal official in another context, I know that there are many, many details of the American Rescue Plan that aren't fully fleshed out yet and awaiting some further state guidance. But it is my understanding that it was the intention of ARPA to include some funding for municipalities to do system improvements for water and sewer. Does MWRA or the advisory board have a sense of what types of resources might be coming down through ARPA? Is that the type of funding that might help in the process of linking up to MWRA?
Again, it's fluid, but I mean the reality is that the authority, the advisory board, our communities, your communities, can influence what can and can't be utilized for those funds. So I mean that's again getting back to it. That's one of the purposes. If you have a plan going in with an idea of how you want those funds to be used, you can help shape and mold them moving forward so that they would be eligible for projects like tying into the MWRA, clearly taking, if the community goes in a different direction, dealing with the water quality issues, dealing with some of those other pieces too. So I'm not trying to avoid the answer, but it moves. So I'm not sure it isn't. I think if you work hard enough and you have enough entities behind it, you can influence how the final outcome will be.
Yeah, good answer. And an audience question that we had is somebody had noted and asked about MWRA's growth over the previous generation. Obviously, since your establishment by the legislature, MWRA has continued to add communities. I wonder if somebody can give an overview of some of that growth, where it's been, what's inspired communities to link up.
Take a first crack at that, or Joe, were you going to go ahead?
No, no, no. I'll fill in if I'm sure I don't need to, but go ahead. Go ahead, Beth.
And I'm going to look to Katie Ronan too, if I miss. So we have had, I would say, since the 80s and then more recently, right, many communities that were not original members, part of the original legislation, have joined, whether they be as partial communities or full communities. In the last handful of years, maybe the last 10 years now, I'm going to say maybe 5 communities have joined, and I'm totally going by memory. So we have continued to grow, and some have gone from partial to full, which increases demand as well. In the last year, we've had 2 new communities join, Burlington and Ashland. Ashland as a partial to supplement their need in times of high demand on their end. Burlington with the plan of ultimately becoming a full member community. I think, and in their case, for various reasons, some of which included water quality challenges that they were having, and ability to use all of their well sources, right? So they needed an alternative supply. So I think, 2 things. One, despite the fact that we have been growing and our service area has been growing, our demand has gone down, right? And I think that's due to careful management. So that's worth mentioning. I would say, and I've only been at the authority for 3.5 years or so, the number of inquiries in terms of interest in understanding what membership entails has really creeped up. And I would say for water quality reasons, right, we've had communities very recently reaching out to us with concerns about PFAS and what they might be required to do, whether it's providing bottled water, what kind of public outreach they have, whether they're going to have to face treatment, which is very expensive, looking for alternatives. And so I would say that issue, right, water quality is a big one. And then, we have regular conversations with communities that need help in times of drought or dry periods. So I'm putting it at a big handful of communities in the last several years have joined. I think we and like I said, I do feel like in the last year especially, the interest has been more than I've seen in a while. I think as a direct result of some of these ongoing challenges. But Joe or Katie, fill in details if I've missed, please.
I think since I've been here a few more than 3.5 years, and from the first ones in the mid 80s from Bedford and Reading, and you've seen in the news Wilmington with the contamination issues. Wilmington became a partial community maybe a dozen years ago, and I'm surmising that may expand considering some of the stories that have been coming out over the past week or two. There's Wilmington. As Beth alluded to, most recently Ashland partially, and Burlington in a phased-in approach it just came on for Part A, and then as the pipe work gets completed, will be 100% MWRA water. And a lot of those discussions really have begun to kick in as communities' water treatment plants begin to need to be upgraded. That really, creates the decision. So, will we ever have enough water? Even will our users pay all of this money for a water treatment plant and then still not have enough water at some point and have a water ban because of registration? With the ever-changing, regulatory front, with PFAS and lead and copper, and name your alphabet letter and what contaminant will be going with it. How do we balance doing it on our own versus having some support? So that has really kicked up the inquiries. And bluntly speaking, and as I opened up with, is that the issue isn't the water. And then one of the main reasons, as the community rolls up its sleeves with the MWRA, it is a huge, a monumental task in many times to figure out, oh, here's the MWRA system and here we are. And there's a lot of open space between point A and point B, and how do we get the water? That becomes one of the most significant pieces, because if it was just the hook up to the hydrant, that'd be easy. It is that we're talking miles and miles sometimes of creating of distribution systems. And then I hop again on that is why this is an ideal time to have this discussion.
I think that leads nicely into our wrap up this morning. And of course, we're going to be sharing a recording of this session along with the slides from this morning onto the partnership's website. But maybe just to wrap up, if either Bethany or Joe want to just reiterate for municipal officials who are watching this and may be interested, how could they go about initiating this process or a conversation?
Again, is the last slide that Beth put up, I identified members of my staff, myself and Beth and her staff, and just to reach out to us by email, by call, and we'll kind of you call us, we will come, and roll up our sleeves, put the maps out on the table, and see if if it's feasible, if it's doable, if it's but we're there. So the first part is that just send us an email.
Well, I want to extend my thanks to everyone for participating today, and certainly the Water Resources Committee is very pleased to have all of you here, and we want to thank you for the work that you always do. And I'll certainly invite anyone who has follow-up questions. You're also welcome to reach out to me at jason@495partnership.org, and happy to get you connected with the MWRA and MWRA Advisory Board team. So with that, I want to thank Joe, Bethany, James, Matt, Sean, and Katie for taking the time to join us this morning. And I want to thank everyone in our audience for taking the time to join us this morning as well. A recording of this session will be live later today, accessible by 495partnership.org. So with that, thank you to the MWRA team. We appreciate it.
And thanks to you, Jason, for giving us this time.
Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a good day.